You're still on time.
Oh, are you not timing? She's got it.
Yeah, she said she flashed cards at me. Okay, I am Benjamin Klein, Western New Mexico University. And what I was going to talk about today is I titled it An Apology for Tweeting of Apologetics. And that's what it is. I am going to, now maybe it's more of an encomium than an apology if we really want to get technical, because I don't know if I've ever tweeted apologetics. If I did, I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, that, oh, I'm tweeting apologetics. So I might be rising in defense of somebody else, which is encomium, not apologetic, where you would be rising in defense of yourself. But I am going to offer a defense. So apologian that way. I am going to offer a defense of tweeting of apologetics. And I have to offer a defense. See, I was having an online argument with somebody the other day, and the person I was arguing with online said an interesting thing. He said, why has young Earth creationism become this really big deal when it was never a big deal before Darwin? Nobody cared. Well, that's how apologetics works. You have to first have the categorical. You have to first have the accusation. You have to have first somebody saying something is wrong. And then you can have the apologia, the defense. If you don't have anything to defend, there is no apologia. So I look at this and I say, when I think of, tweeting of apologetics, even to my mind it comes to, well, that can't work. That's not really going to be apologetics. That won't be apologetic. They can't do it. Not 140 characters. It's not. So I think that there is something to defend in the practice of the tweeting of apologetics. And so I'm going to try and talk about that, how it can still be apologetics. Now we all know that there can be things where there's a massive change because of the other ingredients in the environment, and the thing is no longer the thing anymore, right? You take eggs, right, and you mix them with some baking powder and some flour and some chocolate and some sugar and what am I forgetting? Probably something, oil. You gotta have oil. We don't have oil, and you're gonna need water or milk. And you put it in the oven for a while, and you take it out, and you say, I am now eating eggs. No, you're eating a cake, right? The environment's changed it radically. But just because there are other ingredients, you take those eggs and you add some ham, you add some cheese on top, maybe you put it in a pie crust. So it's a quiche now, but it's still eggs. Nobody's going to look at that quiche and say, I'm not eating eggs. If somebody says you're eating eggs and you're eating a quiche, unless you're a real jerk, you're not going to jump all over them for that, right? They are eating eggs. It's just got other things going on. And so I think that there are ways of knowing what you're doing. We all know that if we go to a movie, how many of us have gone to a movie in the last 6 months in the theater? Right? If you wait a few months, you can get that red box for $1.50. You know that, right? But you paid a lot of money, probably, to go sit in a theater. Why? Why did you do that?
You were one no?
Yeah.
The experience.
For the experience, right? It's just a different experience. But when you go to Redbox and you're looking at the stuff in there, you can pull out your phone and you can text them. I think I'm going to pick up a movie, right? Because we still know it's a movie. It is a different experience. And I'm not going to get up here and say that apologetics through tweeting is the same experience as apologetics as it's been in a number of other meetings. It is a different experience. It is a different thing. But it is still apologetics. And we can know that it's apologetics because there are certain things that make a thing apologetics, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's whether it's in a courtroom, which it almost never is anymore. It's never in a courtroom. That just doesn't happen much. Or it's in a debate, or it's in a book. And some of the things that make apologetics, we can go back to Aristotle. What makes something apologia? What makes it apologia is apologia is a kind of forensic rhetoric. It has to be focused on issues of fact. If you're not focused on issues of fact, you're not focused on the past. So it would be, Aristotle was in the past. If you're not focused on those, it's probably not apologetics. It has to be issues of fact, and it has to be responding to a defense. That goes back to Aristotle. It has to be responding to a defense, and that's one of the things that I said I am doing today. I am defending. So we can pretty much know that this is apologetics because it's responding to issues of fact and it's defending against an accusation, against a category. So you can know that it is an apology for those things. There have been work done in genre studies that have looked at, in the study of rhetoric, that have looked at what is apologetics. Probably the biggest one, Vara and Langkugel. I don't know if it's Ware or Vara, but anyway, I'm guessing. So, says, they said that in apologetics, there are a set number of strategies that can be used. And if you're not using these strategies, denial, bolstering, differentiation, or transcendence, you're probably not doing apologetics. But if you are using one of those strategies, and you are rising in defense, and you are engaged in forensic rhetoric, then you're doing apologetics. It's recognizable. You're eating eggs. You're not having a cake. You recognize what's going on here. And is it different? Yes, it's different. And I'll get to some of the ways in which it's different. Now, in order to prove this, I looked at some apologetic tweets. And I just kind of chose, there's a bunch of apologetic tweeters out there. There's a bunch of them, and I just picked one. And why did I pick this one? I don't know, I like their name, it stands to reason. I think that's probably my reason. Pretty arbitrary. And I just looked at them for a week earlier this month. Now here's the thing, we all know we had to have our abstracts in before a week earlier this month. So when I put the abstract in, I said I was going to talk about stand to reason. I said I was going to use their tweets. I said all of that stuff when I went in because I already knew what I was going to find out was true because I'd looked at it, right? But I just, to provide some examples, I just took a look at it and said, if we look at these tweets, I looked at 47. I looked at a week's worth, that ended up being 47 tweets. Now even just this one apologetics group, this Stand to Reason, they tweet a lot. They tweeted, they started in 2009, and since then they've had just over 20,000 tweets. So that means they're tweeting around 7 tweets per day for the past 7 years. So, is my sample representative? I have no clue. I'm not really interested in that. But we can look at it. And what I found, just kind of taking their tweets, I grabbed this week of tweets and said, this is the week I'm going to look at. And I was going to say, how many of them meet these criteria to be apologetics? And some of them. That's the answer. Most of them. The vast majority of them. They did do some that were more deliberative. And that's more they were doing they were tactical tweets. They were saying if you are going to engage in apologetics, these should be some tactics that you use. So these aren't apologetics themselves because they're not arguing the past, they're arguing the future, they're arguing policy. If you are going to do apologetics, here's how to do it. Well, telling somebody how to do it is no longer forensic, it's deliberative. that's what you'll do in the future. So there were some like that. There were some that were actually epidictic. There were some that were outright. They were epidictic. They like download this wallpaper and show how beautiful your love of apologetics is. And that's really what it was. They were more epidictic. Certainly not forensics. And there were some. What did I just do? Wow, I didn't know I did that. I broke the computer. So anyway, some were forensic, but they were not defensive. They were not rising to defense. They were not apologia. One was even that I found within that week was outright categorical. It was accusatory. It says 2 U.S. senators apply anti-Christian religious texts for government officials, and it shows Bernie Sanders and Van Hollen both putting out this idea that if you don't remember it, if you believe that only Christians go to heaven and everybody else goes to hell, you shouldn't be allowed to be involved in government. You can't be confirmed to an appointment. That was their argument. They lost, but that was their argument. So anyway, that's accusatory. That's not apologetic. But the vast majority of the 47, 38 definitely fell into the apologetics part. So that's my first part of the argument. The first thing I want to do is say, can you tweet apologetics? Yeah, you can. But how different is it when you tweet apologetics? And our immediate thought would be to say, well, it's going to be really different. It's going to be really different. I mean, the root word of apologia is logos. 140 characters doesn't give you a ton of logos. It just doesn't. And no matter how you're using that term, whether you're using the word logos to mean like the Aristotelian form of proof, or you're using the logos just to mean word, either way, you don't got much. There's just not going to be a lot there in the 140 characters. But I have to make a further argument that apologetics is itself different. Now, when Aristotle was talking about apologetics, he was talking about arguing in front of a court. That's what he was talking about, making a defense really in court. That's what he was worried about. But apologetics really hasn't meant that only for quite a while. If you look at most of the rhetorical articles on apologetics, they mostly actually look at corporations making defense of their work. That's what the vast majority, and not in court, but making defense of their work when they've made a mistake or are accused of making a mistake and making it in a public relations context. So that's not in court. And also, when most of us think about apologetics in terms of our faith, we think of it in a still different way. We very seldom think about, well, when I am called up to court for my faith, because, a really cool thing, we don't get that to happen very much. You don't go to jail for your faith in most of the countries where most of us live. It's not if you come to this conference. So that's kind of a thing that happens. But that doesn't happen. It's not called up in court. So the apologetics is different. And one of the reasons that I say apologetics is different is because I say apologetics is done not just as a rhetorical act, but as a faith act. And I go through, and I'd love to, and I'm going to try and keep it down, make a big argument about what makes something a faith act instead of just a rhetorical act. And one of the big things is audience. You have to have an audience for your apologetics. You have to. You have to have somebody who's going to look at your apologetics and make a decision about whether you are guilty or innocent, right or wrong, true or false. You got to have those people there. But their actual decision as far as a faith act goes, is kind of irrelevant. And let me offer some examples. See, in the Christian tradition, apologetics is as old as the Christian tradition. It's as old as the Christian tradition. There's been apologetics as long as there's been Christianity. In fact, a little bit before. They say we were first called Christians at Antioch, I think it says in the Bible, and way before that, they were already doing apologetics. Peter and John, Jesus did apologetics because he was constantly getting accused of stuff. And sometimes he just like, whatever. And sometimes, in the most famous situation, he got accused and opened not his mouth and died. But there's other times, he is being accused of this or that. You are casting out demons by the prince of demons. He rises up and gives an apology, right? No, I am not casting. You can't do that. So all of these other cases, Jesus is accused and he responds with apology. The apostles in the book of Acts continue to do the same thing. Stephen, of course, the first martyr, offers an apology and fails, right? He dies. His apology was not accepted. His argument was not accepted. And actually, that's something that we see happens a lot. The argument's not accepted. And the reason that it doesn't matter if the argument is accepted is because the auditor is not necessarily the audience. A faith act does a number of things, and I don't want to run out of time, so I can go into more detail if you want to during question and answer or something like that. But a faith act is different. A faith act sees God as among the auditors, although you're not really trying to convince God. Like if you're trying to convince God he exists. Wow. Okay, so that's not the deal. But the fact that you're trying to convince others is partly so God sees you convincing others. And so you're kind of going through this. This is one of these things. My idea of the faith act, it comes from Ronald Grimes, who gets it from the Speech Act, from Austin. It goes doom, 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 doom. Then it kind of gets filtered through Durkheim and Kenneth Burke and other people. And that's how I get to the whole thing. But anyway, so a faith act, though, is very different. It's a kind of way of purifying yourself, sanctifying the space that you're in by a sacrifice, by sacrificing the other argument, by sacrificing the other side, maybe even sacrificing yourself. This continued. If apology were just about standing up in court and defending yourself, if that was really what it was about, it would have stopped with Constantine, right? We wouldn't have to do that anymore. But they just kept doing it. There was no longer any accusation, but they kept doing it because it's a sacramental act, but it is a different kind of sacramental act. A way of sanctifying the space when you start to do it on Twitter. It really does become different. But you have to make changes. But to a certain extent, because you're doing it as a faith act, you make the medium adjust. A good example of that is this tweet that they have a couple weeks ago. They're all from a couple weeks ago. And it's drive time, #apologetics. Can God's existence be proved? Greg gives a clear thinking answer. str.org/podcast, the website. #God exists, in case you were wondering. #apologetics. So they have that there. But here's the thing. So that's not much of an argument. But you click on that link. And that takes you to a website that also doesn't have much of an argument. But embedded in that website is a video that goes on for 112 minutes. Okay. So is the logos disappearing? Yeah, right there within the tweet. There's not tons of logos for the apologia. But what it does in order to sanctify the space is draws on bigger and bigger and bigger, and actually out to the infinite. Because within that video there are further links, and then there are further links, And there are further links, and it kind of takes what this medium of television becoming computer, where it just constantly draws you in and makes you do more. Right? That's what it does. It takes that medium and makes use of it in order to sanctify this moment. And is this going to convince anybody? Has anybody ever been convinced by a Facebook argument or a Twitter argument? No. Right? I don't know. But whether or not it actually does, it is done as a faith act in order to sanctify and in order to make holy the speaker and the argument. So there's more to say, lots more to say. But I was out of time a little bit ago too like this.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Alexander Hall, and I'm a student here at St. Mary's College. My senior capstone was called "The Meme is the Message," heavily based upon the works of Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman, but applying them to internet culture. Some of the themes here are going to seem wildly dissonant. To phrase the structure, just to help you understand before I show it, the first major portion of this is about art movements online. And it's more of a McLuhan approach, merely observing the phenomenology. These art movements are based upon the nostalgia of my generation from the 80s and 90s. And so it's more so about what do the symbols mean, how do they work. The second part is about political movements online, which is more, so the first part was a McLuhan approach, merely observing the phenomenology of these online art movements. The second part is more of a Neil Postman approach, which is observing these sort of, what does it mean morally, politically? What are the implications for these online political movements and their disruption of our culture and the subversion of the media and things like that? This is going to be wildly controversial. If you're going to, pull out a gun and shoot me at the end, I wouldn't blame you. Some of this is going to be pretty wild, but you know what? If it, as said in Solinsky in Rules for Radicals, if you're getting the power structure to respond to you, you're not allowing the status quo to remain as it is. So anyway, I hope you enjoy. As some of this is a little bit more blunt because I had to butcher it for the sake of time. So some of the subtlety in the original has been lost. Please enjoy.
With the march of technology, we continuously see new mediums of expression as well as recording memory. This section will be about vaporwave and retrowave, two different nostalgia-based art and music genres which developed online. Composer Brian Eno famously said, "Whatever you now find weird, ugly, uncomfortable, and nasty about a new medium will surely become its signature. CD distortion, the jitteriness of digital video, the cracked sound of 8-bit, all of these will be cherished and emulated as soon as they can be avoided." Truly, much like dealing with the loss of a loved one, it's not always the most practical things about a person or time period that you miss, but it's the quirkiness that provides a charm that you can't really put a price on. Like an exile of a lost civilization, there are certain cultural rituals no longer present in reality. Renting a movie from Blockbuster is now an inconvenient and inefficient concept, but nonetheless, you strangely miss it. This brings me to vaporwave, an online music and art genre based all around the sense of nostalgia and the loss of innocence as we mourn for a bygone age. It comes from the corporate term vaporware, which means a futuristic technology which is proposed by a company but has not yet materialized. It's definitely an acquired taste, to say the least. Truly, when people of the millennial generation like myself watch these dreamlike videos, we get a glimpse both of our past as well as a lost sense of a future we dreamed once that we would live in. Scott Beauchamp of Esquire magazine put it quite eloquently when he said, "The sounds that vaporwave is composed of are recognizable to me, like familiar voices from my past, or little nodules of experience from my childhood. I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s, an upbeat sound collage of voices from utopia that couldn't quite pull itself off aren't just simply pleasing, they feel like part of my identity." The two dominant visual themes I've noticed are coastlines and Roman architecture. My theory is that the Greco-Roman architecture and vaporwave artwork represents The 90s generation's innocence, which has been lost over time, left in ruins. You could say the broken temple serves as a surrogate for the ruined Twin Towers. I propose that every generation has a moment where it truly lost its innocence, and I would say for that moment, for the millennial youth, it was 9/11 on 2001. To bring things back even further, I would like to discuss another nostalgic genre that gained popularity online known as retrowave or synthwave, which is more based around the 1980s. The central theme is all about resurrecting classical male heroism. A scene that summarizes this extremely well is from the 1980s classic Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, where an escaped slave and gladiator stumbles his way into the tomb of an ancient hero. Note how he takes up his predecessor's sword in order to sever the ties of his own life and become the new hero. This theme of heroic actualization is a major one in retrowave media. In this music video of Tech Noir by Gunship, a man enters a cyber world within his television in order to save a woman in distress. In this world, videotapes are used as weapons so that you can become the embodiment of past heroes in order to face present problems. Turbo Kid is another perfect example of a young hero who emulates a superhero from a past age, realizing that while he can never truly become him, he can be his successor. The catalyst for this is when his love interest is kidnapped by a post-apocalyptic band of warlords, and our hero stumbles upon the remains of the hero he emulated. Where Conan took up the previous hero's sword, Turbo Kid puts on the previous hero's armor. Such is the major theme of retrowave on both a very literal and a narrative level. It is about finding strength from the past in order to face our current problems. Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The past went that way. When faced with a totally new situation, we tend to attach ourselves to the objects, to the flavor of the most recent past. We look at the present through a rear view mirror. We march backwards into the future." While the first part of this project was about art movements online, the second part of this project is about political movements online. Neil Postman, the founder of media ecology and successor to Marshall McLuhan, famously quoted Alexis de Tocqueville. "The invention of firearms equalized the vassal and the noble on the field of battle. The art of printing opened the same resources to the minds of all classes. The post brought knowledge alike to the door of the cottage and to the gate of the palace." Truly, just like how guns were the great equalizer in warfare, the printing press made the power of spreading information a free-for-all. The internet and its meme communities are the latest game changer in the culture war. The recent Vault 7 hack by WikiLeaks cited that a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps wrote a paper called Memetics, a growth industry in U.S. military operations. He proposed a meme warfare center where memes could be weaponized for American government interests. Dr. Robert Finkelstein, founder of the Robotic Technology Institute, came to the conclusion that meme wars seem to favor insurgencies because, by their nature, they weaken monopolies on narrative and empower challenges to centralized authority. So naturally, listeners must be curious. Why are people fleeing to have cultural rebellions online with memes instead of in person with dialogue? I would argue that this is because college campuses and political rallies have become places of totalitarian restriction of free thought as well as outright violence. There's a powerful quote from Herbert Marcuse, a leader of the Frankfurt School, a think tank of cultural Marxist academics many communications professors are probably very familiar with. Herbert Marcuse said, "Surely no government can be expected to foster its own subversion, but in a democracy, such a right is vested in the people. This means a subversive majority could develop to withdraw toleration of speech and assembly from various movements. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right. and toleration of movements from the left. As a communications professor I had my first semester here said, the Frankfurt School's ideas have come back in style like Birkenstocks. Let's see what that looks like. Here is a female pro-life protester being assaulted by a feminist studies professor. Here is a Mizzou University communication professor calling for muscle to manhandle a student journalist during the protests. Here are students blocking the entrance of a Jewish conservative speaker. Here are the riots at Berkeley over a gay conservative Breitbart journalist. Here is a Hispanic Trump supporter who was assaulted for carrying a Trump sign. Here is a woman being pelted with eggs for supporting Trump at a rally in San Jose. So you can see why people are afraid of expressing their minds in public places. I suggest that a major reason of why people are so radicalized starts within academia itself. You could say that those who control education have a certain monopoly on truth. You could even call it an abuse of institutional privilege or cultural hegemony. For example, consider how many professors rarely, if ever, mention historical atrocities such as the Middle Eastern slave trade of Europeans and Africans, which was larger and lasted longer than the Atlantic slave trade, often using people as either sex slaves or castrating them so they couldn't reproduce, or communist genocides of Christians such as the Holodomor, which is on the same scale as the Holocaust, or even the Armenian genocide, where many of our fellow Christians were systematically purged by the Turkish Empire. There is a curious lack of outrage or even a social justice term for violent oppression of Christians. Is it politically incorrect to end the silence about these atrocities? So what does this all have to do with internet communities? The best example of diverse people using the internet to disrupt a monopoly on truth was an online movement called Gamergate. Gamergate is best summarized in under 60 seconds by a YouTuber named Leo Pirate.
Gamergate is a consumer boycott and a call for ethics reform in game industry media. Evidence comes up that a writer at Kotaku gave a game favorable coverage because of a relationship he had. Kotaku says that this isn't true. More evidence comes up proving otherwise, and people demand he gets fired. Adam Baldwin shows support by creating the Twitter hashtag Gamergate. In response, Kotaku and many other sites published 14 different articles, all saying the same thing. Gamers are dead, all in the same day. Readers declare a boycott on these sites and begin contacting their advertisers. To fight the stereotype, the hashtag #NotYourShield is made because minorities like myself hate having game journalists pretend to speak for us, especially since some of them are racist. Reddit's R-Gaming starts censoring all forms of Gamergate discussion. Even 4chan censors Gamergate. This leads to a mass migration to a much better website. Feminist scholar Christina Summers releases a video debunking the idea that video games make people sexist. Game sites call her a conservative. She's a Democrat. Milo Yiannopoulos leaks emails from a private Google group called Game Journals Pro, proving that game journalists collude to shape narratives. Corruption is also exposed in award shows like IGF. Not wanting to associate with such hacks, one by one advertisers start to pull out.
Remember, the internet serves as a place where groups can organize to disrupt academic or media monopolies on truth. Here is feminist Christina Hoff Summers describing Gamergate from her perspective.
Gamergate is a Twitter hashtag. Some gamers identify with the hashtag because they believe there's too much corruption in gaming. Others are weary of cultural critics who evaluate video games through the prism of gender politics. Because for years they've been disparaged as nerds, shut-ins, and proto-school shooters. Now the critics have added misogynists and death threateners to the mix. Writers at popular game websites like Kotaku and Polygon, they did a good job defending video games from the false charge that they foster violence. But when gender activists came along, accusing games of creating misogyny, these journalists eagerly jumped on the bandwagon. Now, when Gamergaters protest the politicization of gaming journalism, they're not fighting progress or thwarting feminism. They are pushing back on a hardline, puritanical gender politics that for some reason, many of their critics are imposing on them. Well, take it from Based Mom. Gamergate overall is a voice for moderation in today's fevered debates over sex and gender. And those gamers, they're not going away anytime soon. I mean, once they enter a battle, they like to win. And they know a thing or two about how to slay a dragon.
What did Gamergate accomplish? Quite a bit, in fact, as YouTuber Leo Pirate further elaborates.
First off, Kotaku and Polygon both updated their public ethics policy to enforce Patreon disclosure. This means if a writer is financially supporting someone they cover, they have to disclose that in their article. Eurogamer, IGN, GamerRanks, and PC Gamer also updated their ethics policy as a direct response to feedback from Gamergate. People in Gamergate actually contacted the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to address and enforce their affiliate disclosure policy.
Native advertising is basically saying to corporations that want to advertise, we will camouflage your ads to make them look like news stories. That's essentially it.
That's essentially it.
Because of this, sites like The Verge and Kotaku now need to add disclosure to articles that are really giant advertisements in disguise. And yes, according to the response from the FTC, Gamergate is directly responsible for this. You're welcome. On top of encouraging ethical disclosure, people have also been boycotting the advertisers of corrupt sites like Gawker and The Verge. Once people found their sponsor page and started sending emails, advertisers started dropping like flies. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Olympus, and many others all announced they're no longer advertising with Gawker. It has also cost Gawker Media at least $1 million. People are quick to say Gamergate has become a media watchdog group, and for the most part it has. But don't forget how many charities and fundraisers people have also supported. UNICEF, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Center for National Bullying Prevention, and of course, the Fine Young Capitalists. They made a fundraiser to help women make video games, and even though GG will never get the recognition it deserves, actions speak louder than words. Let's keep exposing corruption and conflicts of interest. And just as WikiLeaks said, let's go to the top.
In media studies, there is a strong divide between perspectives of Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman. In the first half of my project, I took a more McLuhan approach, simply observing the phenomena of online art movements. In the second half, I took a Neil Postman approach of morally questioning media and wondering what its implications are for Western civilization. Whether you come from the perspective that art is a mirror or that art is a hammer, whether you are more focused on making money or making a difference. I conclude my documentary with a paraphrased Greek proverb about building futures for our civilization. A society grows great when those in power plant trees under whose shade they know they shall never live to sit. Thank you for watching. Good day and God bless.
Wow. Oh, can we see the Rick and Morty?
'Q&A night.
For about 10 minutes until the next Q&A session.
Sure, I'll try. Those are both really interesting. My first question, though, I found myself thinking, Benjamin, you were talking about use of links as a strategy for sort of beginning a deeper conversation. I almost sort of picture the link in the tweet as a kind of an entry point into the deeper conversation, which I think is really interesting, and I think for a lot of people suggests a kind of hopeful vision for all kinds of electronic communications, not just apologetics conversations, but all kinds of electronic communications that start in those smaller pieces. And I was just, it was something you sort of brought in. I know there are time constraints and all of this, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that works, and especially if in your sort of read of this stuff, you've been finding any strategies that work particularly well. Because I have to say, as someone who teaches a lot, that's the kind of thing I'd love to be able to leverage in my own teaching. I don't really do apologetics, but the notion of pulling students in with smaller bits to get them to engage in a deeper conversation would be really
To a certain extent, that's what HTML is. I mean, that was from the beginning, as soon as it became a hypertext markup language, it was to link information from one place to another.
from the short to the long.
From the short to the long.
Is the way that's really hopeful in it.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know. I think you know, I heard the other day that internet advertisement doesn't work at all, and I don't know what the basis for that was, but somebody said that. I think we all heard it, and if that's true, then I don't know that it is. But I think if internet advertisement does work at all, it's because people are looking at links, and so I think for short links, in order to get more information, in order to go further and go deeper and go on and like that. No, I don't necessarily know what strategies are good. And in the one that I talked about, there are all kinds of interesting things going on in the tweet. It's not just that there's a link. There's several hashtags which are actually, I think, to draw it to the tweet, not to go further. But Now there's a picture, as a Drive Time podcast is a picture of a steering wheel and all of these little things that are to give, I think, a sense of urgency about you need to do this fairly quickly. Another recurring theme in at least STR stuff is clocks, pictures of clocks. They're going to put a picture of a clock in and say, so-and-so is on the clock and defending the existence of God and taking all your questions in 20 seconds. And so to give that kind of sense of urgency, I mean, that's kind of like the Monroe's motivated sequence does that, you have to call now. And I think that could be a strategy that works. But no, I wasn't looking at that, so I don't have the answer.
Fair enough. But I love those
So that was a really long, hoping I would come to an answer in my head, but no, I didn't.
Thank you so much. Ads don't work. I heard that too, and I was intrigued the other day. But advertising came out of the symbolists, the poets who said, doesn't matter what you say, it's how it makes you feel. So you don't buy a Lexus because you saw the ad. You buy a Lexus and then you see the ad and you go, that's who I am. That's how I understand this from studying McLuhan. He said, what we need to do is invent new questions and new metaphors. So both of you have done deep research and given us great presentations. But since all that, tell us a new question that's come up on your topic to you since you made your film and since you gave your presentation.
You're the first. I don't care.
You mean since I presented today, do I have any new questions?
Yeah, well, you made your film.
Right.
After you made your film, in the process of just attending over the last few days, any new questions have come up for you on your topic?
That's a great question. I'd have to say, how can I show it to more people? How can I show it to more people? How can I get the word out there? Because there really are sort of monopolies on truth that happen based on what corporation is running or who owns what various media source. Like I think about, say, when you consider a media source like Russia Today, or which is run by the Russian government, or when you consider a media source like Al Jazeera, which is run by the Qatari government. And so many times, based upon who owns what media, they control what is or isn't said, what stories to take off or don't. So the thing is, how can you break these monopolies so that there really is a democratization of information?
I'm wondering whether the fact that the Faith Act manipulates the medium of Twitter, right? Whether that is so that the media is the messenger. I think from a rhetorical standpoint, that's really true. When you're dealing with the Faith Act, the faith is also a medium. So the ecology is the media trying to both survive in this environment, right? Finding a way to do that. And I wonder the extent to which faith is necessary for that. Grimes' work on where I get the idea of the Faith Act comes from Austin's work in the Speech Act. And I wonder if any kind of Speech Act thing is more a medium than a message, and then can be studied media ecologically to see how these speech acts are surviving in different media, and the extent to which faith is necessary in order to arrive at the conclusions at which I cannot arrive. I really don't have any answers to those questions.
I have a question for you, Benjamin. I was interested, you brought up, of course, the limitation in Twitter, right? You got it for 140 characters. And you brought up one way that Stand to Reason was kind of trying to get around that, using links to other links, right? Hyperlinking. But you also see people will do the, one of 5 tweets, 2 of 5 tweets. They'll do those successful tweets, or they'll do this picture, they'll write up a press release, they'll take a picture of it, and then they'll post it. Like, were you seeing that happen at all, or were they really just trying to
They were doing that, and I want to, as I continue to work on this, I'm going to look at some more. It's really hard. One of the biggest questions I have about Twitter. Here's another question I have. How do you decide when you're looking at tweets where to begin and where to end? You know, when most of our tools, and I come from a rhetorical background, most of our tools for rhetorical criticism look at communication with discrete beginnings and ends. You know, and there is no beginning. Twitter is eternal, and especially when you go into links, it's eternal. So now I've lost your question.
Oh.
No, what was it?
Well, the idea is it's kind of extending beyond the constraints
Okay.
40 characters. I've seen people try to do that to get around so they can have
so they can get around
extended.
What I think Twitter did is language is cheap. One of the things, words are cheap. One of the things that I compared as I was looking at apologetics is that standard rule of papyrus during the 4th century, when we had like a lot of the early apologetics being done, Justin Martyr and Tertullian and stuff like that. Standard roll was about 4 drachma in Egypt. So I know that now. But anyway, standard roll of papyrus. And that was about a week's wages for a roll of papyrus. Now we're producing so many exabytes of data that any information that gets obsolete by the time I get it, right? For how many? Lots. We're producing lots of data. And so that makes talk cheap. And what Twitter found a way to do is to make talk expensive again. Because actually they made it of infinite worth, right? Because no matter how much you pay Twitter, you only have 140 characters. It's not like you can pay extra to get a little bit more. And so people do these number of tweets. And I would think that, you know, you could do almost an Aquinian, like the Summa Theologica, setting down your arguments in numbered tweets. And they don't do that. And I think the reason they don't do that is that I don't think that's going to pull something. You know, ultimately Twitter is still the medium of television. That's still what it is. And the way television works is to draw you in, draw you in, draw you in, draw you in. To take you to the next short thing, to the next short thing, to the next short thing, to the next short thing. And numbers don't necessarily do that. Links do. Links do. So
I'm thinking about both of your presentations at the same time, and then I'm thinking underneath faith is values. And if we're following links, we're usually self-selecting toward what we already agree with to begin with. And I'm thinking, your presentation really gave me the impression of information overload, you know, which I'm sure was part of the point. And then I enjoyed both your presentations very much. And I'm thinking, perhaps to bring in Al Jazeera and Russia, whatever, a slowdown would add to that layer of political over the information overload.
True. I think in my personal opinion, I think that there is a sort of speeding up of things. In the same way, to extend that Alex de Tocqueville quote that I mentioned earlier, he said that whereas once people wrote books, now they're writing pamphlets. And I think the next stage from pamphlets then, or at least in a certain way, then is memes. Because some of the best apologetics, some of the best arguments, some of the best rhetoric I've seen was not in a treatise. I mean, I have to twist the arm of some of my people my age to get them to read an article. But if I send them a really good meme that uses imagery and quick rhetoric to make a strong point, often through satire, that can change minds very quickly. And so, I mean, in terms of apologetics, it's like true, some of with numbers, or it's hard to use something in 140 characters with just words. But if you use a really good zinger of an image, and you spread the idea immediately, especially to the point of humor, that can be huge, especially considering how widely spread some of those can get.
So you're saying the mode of our communication has to include the visual and the written and the humor and whatever in order to capture the young audience?
I would say so. I would say that there definitely is a speeding up of things.
And, well, we see that, but how much can your mind absorb at once, no matter what? Because we're limited by our human perceptions. And so I would imagine yesterday morning's presentation must have really grabbed you. And I'll say something about that. I spoke to Eric McClune about it afterwards. And what I said to him is, would you agree with my assessment that the presentation today is really the 21st century version of the book, The Medium is the Massage? And he said, yes. And so yours would fit in with that. Which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, that is. Thank you very
I
much.
think.
So I have a question for you. And of course, you're probably looking at me, I totally knew these 90s references, like the things, and the whole thing too, the whole style of it was really fun. I kind of have that fascination there. So you talked about in the second part, this idea of the truth monopoly, and I don't know if it's capital T truth or little t truth, but whatever truth monopoly, and the role of corporations in it. I'm wondering if you've also considered, and maybe it just wasn't in here for time, I know it's really, compressed the role of algorithms under this guise of neutrality, the idea of the filter bubble, the idea of what becomes influencers, what becomes trending, and then also this underlying commodification of all this, right? I'm just wondering kind of how all that fits into this idea of what's being sort of this truth monopoly, because then who's seeing what?
I would say, to some certain extent, people choose what you see based on what they want to sell. I would say that's very true. But I would also say there sometimes is a very conscious idea of engineering and what we are going to discuss. To quote George Orwell, who wrote 1984, he said, if you wish to destroy people, the number one way to do it is through obscuring their idea of their own history. And so I think about that frequently because the whole idea of what history is or isn't talked about can completely change your whole idea about your worldview, power structures, who has done what wrong. For example, I was thinking as just an idea for an event that I would do at college, I would specifically title it Marginalized Perspectives on Oppression and Slavery. And of course, everybody who goes would be expecting something which, shows all the ills of Western civilization. But if they show up and they see stuff about communist genocides and the Middle Eastern slave trade, this would be true to what I had advertised, but it would totally be the exact opposite of everything that they had previously heard about, because I think many people, when they control what they talk about, they have a specific agenda in mind. And it's just like when you're selling something or when you're spreading the gospel of your ideas. I think one thing that we have definitely lost is the idea of objectivity, and people actually want to present a forum of both sides to speak. I mean, even in our own diversity center, the Intercultural Center, we have a big portrait of Che Guevara, who, that place is for specifically, diverse people and gay people. And Che Guevara, killed gay people, killed gay people at gunpoint, and then said horrific things about black people. But it's like, because they don't have that perspective, they think, well, he was just a, freedom fighter. And so I think that sometimes, as you've said, it is indeed about algorithms and people trying to sell things. Other times, I think it is more people evangelizing with their ideology.
Well, mine is, after that, is completely tiny, because that was a great answer. The thing I just wanted to mention was, talking about humor, is I have probably 1,500 Twitter followers. My daughter, the comedic actress, and all of her friends who are comics and comedic actors have hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers because they can tell something funny in 140 characters. And they tell it over and over again. And they do have links to their YouTube videos, etc. But the important thing is just that it's funny in 140 characters. And so the message gets across, which means they have huge followings.
Brevity is the soul of wit, right?
Something
Reality, yes.
A lot about is the exordium in classical rhetoric, the concept of the exordium, and a lot of times that's been, post Dale Carnegie, relegated to just an attention getter. But I think that moment at the beginning of receiving communication, where you establish the emotional tone of everything you're going to say from then on, and the credibility of it, that moment is maybe all you have in a tweet. And that does take a particular kind of skill. in order to get people so into the exordium that they will choose to go to the narratio, partitio, confirmation, reputation, interest.
Yeah, Ben, question on yours. I've tried to practice well, and I teach Christian apologetics. And maybe one problem with the Twitter link process, though, is I really believe that modern apologetics really has to be conversation-centered. It just has to be. And so then you have the problem, though it is effective to get people to think and read in more detail, to link to something, to get the conversation back, to draw because Twitter is so ADD enhancing. So the problem is, how do you get people back to your conversation after they've clicked the link and gotten into the cyberspace, and you've lost them? Maybe to good stuff, but they could certainly not come back to you.
And I think that an interesting thing, a lot of those links actually take you to live podcasts. Now, only when they're going on live. Later, you're getting a recording of it. But the live podcast where they have people call in their category, their accusation. That's not, of course, the way they phrase it. Come accuse us of things. But they say call with your questions, but what they really mean is call in or type in or Facebook in or tweet in with.
Twitter is a window into a conversation.
In that case, they're using it as a window into the conversation.
Sounds good.
But I think that the most functional apologetics from a rhetorical standpoint, actually convincing people of things, Stephen got up and gave his apologetics and they threw stones at him. But when it was more conversational even then, it seemed to be when it actually functioned. And those were great apologetics, but then you die.
Keep going.
Tertullian says that